gentlemen. Thank you for joining us at yet another event in our ThinkTent. It's been very busy so far, and I'm really pleased to see it's busy again for such an important topic. Is the UK's approach to apprenticeships failing the levelling up agenda? I'm delighted that we're working with Mighty on this event, who have joined us today, and also joined by a stellar panel to discuss quite a few issues under the umbrella of apprenticeships. So we've got Chris Clarkson MP for Hayward and Middleton, the Right Honourable Robert Halfon MP will be joining us hopefully shortly, MP for Harlow, Jasmine Hudson, the Chief People Officer at Mighty, Rob Wilson, Commissioner for the Social Mobility Commission, and the Right Honourable Lord Willett, who's President of the Resolution Foundation. So again, there's lots of themes within this broader topic. We need a skills agenda to boost productivity and innovation and to create jobs and even into the future green jobs and hopefully ease the burden on taxpayers too. So do we need more vocational paths offering better social mobility and more focus on up and reskilling to build the industries of the future? And do we need a cultural shift also where apprenticeships have the same social status as degrees? There's going to be a lot more besides to talk about, but what we're going to do very quickly is play a quick video from our supporters today at Mighty.
I'm Meg. I'm a second year electrical installation apprentice at Mighty PFI and Wigan and Lee College. I've always wanted to learn a trade. My undergraduate degree was in theatre, but the backstage of theatre, and I'd always wanted to advance on that. So I found the electrical installation and thought, well, they go hand in hand. It was a good work-life balance as well as work-college balance. It was not only that I was doing good for myself, I was, showing that it's an opportunity for other young women to get into.
I'm Andy Traynor, I'm the Managing Director of Mighty Telecoms. We all take our mobile phones for granted. It's the first thing you touch in the morning, it's the last thing you touch at night. We never ask ourselves the questions of how it works. If we look at the world we live in today, not just the cellular industry, but the renewable sector, solar, if we look at EV charging, these are all new sectors that are aggressively under pressure. One of the biggest challenges we face is the government announced to the British public a blanket coverage of LTE and internet connection across the UK. Unfortunately, we don't have the right skill set requirements within our industry at this moment in time. We have an age network. We've never put in the basic foundations of apprenticeship schemes to progress our school leavers into the industry, and that's now left a massive skill gap. The average age of our field engineers being around about 54. Now, more than ever, it's absolutely imperative that we act now and invest in our apprenticeship schemes and trailblazer schemes, provide an investment into our youth. If we don't act now, we're going to fall behind.
Very much, and why not roll straight into talk to hear from Mighty, Jasmine Hudson, the Chief People Officer.
Thank you very much, John. Hi everyone, I'm Jasmine Hudson. I'm Chief People Officer at Mighty, and this is my first party conference. So I'm pleased to be here in an esteemed company to talk about the apprenticeship levy from the industry view today. For those of you that may not be aware of Mighty, we have 62,000 colleagues working across the UK in a range of roles from engineer to intelligence analyst to security officer to cleaner and many, many more. We service a broad range of customers from the public and private sector, from schools, banks, hospitals, defence training estates and major government departments. We're a business based on our phenomenal people. So these are people that worked tirelessly through COVID to help support Keep Britain Running, be that in standing up Nightingale hospitals, setting up and running hundreds of test centres, keeping critical infrastructure safe and hospitals clean. Now, we have over 1,000 apprentices at any one time, and we have hundreds of success stories from the apprenticeship levy, such as Meg, who you saw there in the video, who was actually nominated for the Rising Star Award at the National Apprenticeship Awards. And we invest in our people because we know the benefits to business and social mobility when opportunity and ambition align. And my own story goes some way to that kind of end. So I left school with my A-levels, didn't go to university first time round, grew up in a council house, so university wasn't the obvious option for me. And I joined MIT 14 years ago as an administrator. Now, I was funded through my qualifications, which are now available through the apprenticeship levy, and I completed those part-time alongside working. Many years later, with many more years work experience under my belt, I'm now Chief People Officer of our £4 billion business with 75,000 colleagues across the UK. So it's fair to say there's lots to celebrate about the government's current approach to apprenticeships, but we believe that there is more to be done to broaden that opportunity to the masses. So whilst there's lots of things that could be done, we'd like to focus on 3 things that we think will broaden the levelling up agenda to many, many more people. So firstly, empower the aspiration nation, so flex the levy to allow it to be spent on shorter courses or to better support entry-level requirements, including maths and English. So it's often part-time workers or those without basic maths and English qualifications that would most benefit from investment from the levy. Secondly, add more courses for core skills, certainly those servicing public sector and public frontline services. So we employ 21,000 cleaners and 14,000 security officers. As at today, there are no apprenticeship standards within those job roles to help those people advance. And finally, speed up trailblazers for future and green skills. So you heard from Andy there in the video about some of the barriers that the telco industry is facing. We don't have apprenticeship standards in some of the core skills we need for the future. And we absolutely see ourselves at Mighty as core to supporting the government's green agenda, but we need the policy tools to do so. So whilst we're absolutely great advocates for the apprenticeship levy, we think those 3 changes will really make a change for people, but we need action, and we need action now. So we're calling on the government to take those actions and be bold in the action they take to make the levy work for people, for industry, and for economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. For ease, we'll just jump straight to your left and then work along. So, Lord Willits, the floor's yours. Apprenticeships.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. And look, my approach to apprenticeships is quite heavily charged with personal experiences. First of all, I was brought up in Birmingham. My family were all Birmingham craftsmen. And my father was an engineer who ran the apprenticeship program of IMI, a Midlands engineering firm. So our family were all in the great Birmingham trades: gun barrel makers, glaziers, glass makers, tailors. So I understand for our party the emotional appeal of apprenticeships. Then I left Birmingham, and one of my early jobs in my 20s was working in Margaret Thatcher's policy unit, where the agenda was a growth agenda, and particularly we thought Britain was stuck, an immobile society, and we were in the wrong business sectors, we weren't flexible and entrepreneurial enough. And I'll be frank with you, apprenticeships were seen as part of the problem, not part of the solution. The 1980s economic agenda was there were too many people who were being trained in old jobs who didn't have the flexibility to move to completely different jobs. Too many apprenticeships were hereditary. Your parents had been long-standing, just like my own experience in Birmingham, long-standing in certain company sectors. These business sectors were shrinking. They weren't viable for the 21st century. Apprenticeships were part of the trade union, corporatist Britain we were trying to get rid of. That was the agenda of the 1980s. Now, the world has moved on a lot, and apprenticeships are back in favour, and I love apprenticeships. But there are several challenges that apprenticeships face. The first one, which ties in with what Jasmine was saying, is that apprenticeship means something really quite particular. It means that you've found an employer who has already offered you a job. Apprenticeships are delivered by employers who've already decided to recruit you. When you look at how the apprenticeship levy is spent and how apprenticeships grow, apprenticeships are growing amongst workers who have already been recruited by the employer, that the employer then wishes to train further. And if you look at the age distribution of apprenticeships, the patterns are very clear. They are moving up the age scale, and the most recent total I have from a my most recent research on this shows that of all apprenticeship starts in 2021, the majority were amongst people aged over 25. So if that is what an apprenticeship is, and I think there's importance in maintaining a commitment to apprenticeships in their traditional meaning, the kind of programs that Jasmine is calling for, which make perfect sense, many of them aren't apprenticeships. And if you ask me, one of the inhibitions we've got, and one of the reasons why we keep on getting stuck on skills and vocational training in this country, we think the only form it can take is apprenticeships. What we actually need is a large amount of vocational training, especially helping school leavers, which precedes getting an employer and an apprenticeship. And what Jasmine was really calling for was the apprenticeship levy not just to cover apprenticeships. It should become a vocational training levy and should not simply be apprenticeships. First point. The second point, which was touched on in the video, is geographical distribution. So if you are, I always think of it in a very simple way. Imagine that you are living in Derby and you're a youngster and you've always loved the sea and you really want to be a surfing instructor. And imagine that you are living in Taunton by the sea, and what you've really wanted to do all the way in your life was to work for Rolls-Royce and do aero engines. If apprenticeships are local and you have to find your local employer, and we're expecting 16-year-olds or 18-year-olds to do them, there will be large amounts of vocational training which people do not have access to. We have, in the old days, apprenticeships were residential. You moved in and lived with your employer. There are a small number of residential apprenticeships. Network Rail has a rail track apprenticeship scheme based near Portsmouth. There is one vocational training centre for advanced jobs in the construction industry out in East Anglia. Are we willing to fund residential apprenticeships to enable people to move to do a job somewhere else? And if so, how do we fund that? One of the advantages which HE has is that HE has a funding model which enables people to move from where they live. It is one of the biggest drivers of geographical mobility in the country, and we should be a more mobile society. How are we willing to fund people who wish to do an apprenticeship somewhere else? Will their wage be sufficient? Should we have a loan scheme like HE for apprenticeships? Second issue. And third issue is social access. We monitor social access to university, higher education. It needn't be in a university, that's a different issue we may come to during discussion. We monitor it very carefully. And there's a general assumption universities, higher education is socially selective and apprenticeships aren't. We've now got evidence, because thank heavens we've extended apprenticeship schemes up the training levels. We've now got apprenticeships at level 6 and 7, which are in areas where there are also students doing university degrees. So we've now started being able to do some comparisons. You take a given subject, a given level of qualification, level 5 or 6, and compare the people doing the high-level apprenticeship and the people going to university. The people who do the apprenticeships are more white, more male, less likely to be disabled, and less likely to be from a deprived area than the people going to university. And the reason is we've been focusing very hard for the last 25 years in expanding access into higher education, and we monitor it closely. Are we willing to monitor similarly the people that employers decide to take on for apprenticeships, and are we willing in somehow to check them up? We have been a free market party that does not wish to regulate the decisions that employers take about who they recruit, but that has certain implications for the access agenda. So look, I am back emotionally where I started from my family's own personal experience of a believer in apprenticeships. But I don't think there's been enough rigorous consideration of exactly what we mean and exactly how we deliver them.
Thank you, Lord Willits. In the interest of time, we'll just jump straight on to Rob. Rob, what do you go?
Right, thank you, John. First, I just want to be clear that I am a Social Mobility Commissioner, but my remarks today are in a personal capacity rather than in a formal capacity. But I think it would be wrong not to share a lot of the research that has come out of the Social Mobility Commission that is relevant to this subject. And I suppose the answer to the questions John posed at the start, to all those questions, the answer is yes. But with the right tweaks and changes, apprenticeships could do so much more than they're currently achieving, because they are one of the absolute few indisputably effective tools of social mobility currently available to the government. And there's now significant evidence, everywhere you look really, that they really work, because they benefit workplace learners in terms of the earnings they can get, the continued education they get for much longer, and the much more fulfilled working lives that they get from it. So the Commission undertook a rather large survey back in 2020, and it was called Apprenticeships and Social Mobility Fulfilling Potential. And it found that the current system is not working, and that the main beneficiaries of apprenticeships are people who actually don't need them. And the findings have been confirmed in subsequent reports as well. Now, the authors of that report were London Economics, and they showed that the apprenticeship levy introduced back in 2017 has disproportionately funded higher level apprenticeships for learners rather than the more disadvantaged communities, and who would obviously benefit a great deal more. And it also revealed a number of what are called disadvantage gaps at every stage of the apprenticeship journey, from the initial selection of the candidate by employers to the quality of the training that disadvantaged apprentices get. And as David said, geography is also an extremely important issue. Lack of opportunities in deprived areas can force disadvantaged people to have to undertake very expensive, difficult and long journeys to get to work. So following that levy's introduction, there was a large fall in the number of learner starts, with the worst off learners bearing the brunt of that. And if you look at the figures, something like, I think the number of disadvantaged apprenticeships fell by about 35% at that point. But there are also other issues that aren't in the report that need to be mentioned. There's issues around how the apprenticeship levy has reduced the uptake of apprenticeships by small and medium-sized enterprises. And there's also this focus on existing training places rather than broadening pathways for new entrants into work. But the good news, and I think we should focus on some good news, is that the report did find that apprenticeships targeted very effectively and could be one of the most effective and powerful tools of boosting social mobility of any of the options available. So this, in fact, is something I've believed in throughout my entire adult life. Non-degree routes to higher skills, particularly apprenticeships, benefit learners who are unlikely to follow the conventional pathway associated with social mobility. That is just a fact. But one of the challenges we face post-school is education is completely dominated by our preoccupation with universities and higher education. And it's not really that surprising when you realise how well-resourced and effective the lobbying industry for higher education is within Whitehall and Parliament. You know, whether it's expanding student numbers, whether it's tuition fees, whether it's more money for research, whether it's more overseas students, they are there lobbying day in, day out. And apart from a few champions like Robert Halfon, who has been obviously extremely vocal on this subject, apprenticeships rarely get the same attention because they don't have the same resources to make the case. And this is particularly important, as one recent report argued, that apprenticeships should be a central focus of post-16 educational policy, as the current focus on university has meant that a lot of young people have ended up in low-quality courses which leave them worse off than if they hadn't attended university at all, and with a big debt to boot. If social mobility is going to improve, little will be achieved if we purely focus on a debate about elites and elite education. which is where the debate has been for most of the last 20 to 30 years, and we've got Tony Blair to thank for that. We need to respond to two simple questions, in my view. One, where are the supply of opportunities coming from? And secondly, how can these be extended to a much wider variety of people? Now, this is the role that apprenticeships and the apprenticeship system should be playing.
Rob, thank you very much. When I was younger, actually, a group of friends, there was some that went to uni, some that went to work, and some that did apprenticeships. The ones that went to work and did apprenticeships all owned their own house by the time they were 30. And those who went to uni certainly didn't. So, Chris, I'll go straight over to you.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to associate myself with the comments made from the previous two speakers. I do think that there's a huge amount of potential in apprenticeships, but we're not doing all the right things at the moment. I'd certainly think with the apprenticeship levy, we need to be having a serious discussion about how we sort of refocus it on a skills agenda. Briefly, I just want to talk about how I feel apprenticeships fit into the levelling up agenda. I represent a sort of off-the-shelf red wall constituency. Very few people go to university. Apprenticeships are actually a great leveller up for us. I mean, it's an opportunity for people to access careers that they wouldn't necessarily have. I'm very lucky to have a very comprehensive FE college in my patch and a very, very good dynamic head who is, giving some serious thought to how we get some of these young people into areas where they may not necessarily have had access before. But I do think we also need to talk about parity of esteem with further education in university, because I think that is part of the problem as well. Psychologically, we sort of look at apprenticeships as being something other than degrees and not quite as good. And actually, now that we are seeing higher level, sort of level 6 qualifications coming from apprenticeships, I think we're actually starting to see that this is a more practical route in for some people. Everybody learns differently, and I think we understand that, then we can start to understand where education fits into the levelling up agenda. For my patch, it will be the only way to actually sort of level up. I don't need a bridge, I don't need a new shopping centre. What I actually need is for people to be able to access good quality work. But the only way they're going to do that is if they have the necessary skill set. A lot of them cannot afford to take on £50,000 of debt and move away from home. If you are able to access the training that will get you the skills you need to get a high-paid job in the region, then that is a game changer. So I do think we need to have a serious discussion about how the apprenticeships levy works. I do think it is starting to skew towards older people. It's about giving additional skills and training to people who are already doing the job. There should be an onboarding route for people who are school leavers who may not necessarily be academically inclined, but actually might be academically capable. I think our education system has, and it is a Blair era innovation, it's been skewed towards the academic, certainly from my cohorts. I mean, I was the first ones in the first cohort to pay student fees, but the aim was to try and get 50%ers into university. And so you did end up with people doing a double first in jazz studies and wine tasting at the University of Outer Hebrides, which is complete nonsense because it's no use to anybody. So you've got a proliferation of junk degrees. We've got a massive skills gap, and you saw with the chap who worked in the telco industry. I used to work in-house as a lawyer for a big telco before I did this. It was a terrible problem. We had a massive skills gap, and the thing is we're not addressing it. I think we're doing some of the right things, but there is a long way to go, and I do think if we want this to be part of the levelling up agenda, then we need to have a serious rethink about the structure.
Chris, thanks very much. Jazz studies and wine tasting might not be useful, but they sound fun. Rob, over to you.
Well, hello everyone. I just want to sort of ask the audience a question just to start off with. And I've been thinking about this quite a bit over the past few weeks. Why on earth would a young person vote Conservative at this point in time? They can't afford to pay their rent because rents are sky high, especially in the cities. They can't afford to take on a mortgage and get a deposit. They don't believe in the values that we have as a party. They think we're on the side of the well-off, and young people rightly are idealistic. And so I don't have every solution how to turn that around, but I do have one. And I believe that the answer to it is apprenticeships. It was my first ever speech in the House of Commons was about apprenticeships, and it started because I went one day as a parliamentary candidate to a grotty building in my constituency where I was meeting young people who were from very disadvantaged backgrounds and who were struggling to get any kind of employment. It was actually a project run by the Catch-22 at the time, I think. And all of them said they were desperate to do apprenticeships, but they were told to be, they couldn't find out how to do it. They were being told to go and do interviews in Leeds, even though they were from Essex, pay for it, the travel themselves, and whatever it may be. And I literally walked out of that building. It was about in 2008. I got elected in 2010 and said to myself, if I get elected, I'm going to campaign on apprenticeships almost every day whilst I am a member of Parliament. And the title of this is Apprenticeships Failing the Levelling Up Agenda. Well, I think there is a danger of that. I mean, thus far, the only thing I've heard emanating from the Department for Education is we want more kids to go to Oxbridge and we want more grammar schools. Now, I've got no problem with grammar schools. I would have one in my constituency, although I do think it's wrong that they don't look after, only 3% are from disadvantaged backgrounds who go to grammar schools, and that's got to change. Should be the national average at least, if not 50%. But that's the only thing that they seem to be talking about. And what we need to be doing is transforming the landscape and saying to every single young person, if you get the qualification, we will guarantee you an apprenticeship. And what we need to be saying to every young adult who is about, not necessarily saying university, we should be saying skills, skills, skills. And we should be saying to that young adult, worried about a loan? Well, don't worry anymore, because we're not asking you to take out huge loans with whacking interest rates and that will dog you for many years of your life. What we're going to do is we're going to offer you a degree apprenticeship. You earn while you learn. There's no loan, no debt. You earn decent money. You get a good skill, and you can do them now in almost every single subject, from journalism to engineering, and you meet the skills that the country needs. And it can, if we do this right, provide a ladder of opportunity to the disadvantaged. And we have this obsession about university. We have this obsession about quantity over quality. And it shouldn't, as I say, it shouldn't be university. It should be skills, skills, skills. And I would have, if I would have any target, I would have 50% of students doing degree apprenticeships. And that means they get a university experience, they earn while they learn, and they get a good job. And I've seen it. So even in the blue chip, so-called Russell Group universities, I went to Exeter University, I loved university. So I'm not an anti-university person. It was a great time of my life. If I had been offered an apprenticeship, I would have done it, but I didn't know anything about apprenticeships when I was 18. But I went to my university, I was asked to speak, not at a degree ceremony, but a degree apprenticeship ceremony. And it was one of the great moments of my life, because there were hundreds of students from all walks of life who were doing state-of-the-art degree apprenticeships, every single one of them in the hall, every single one of those hundreds of students, they had a job at the end. Now, can you say that about graduates? No. We know that in many of the universities, 50% of graduates are not getting good graduate jobs, despite taking on a loan of 9,000 and a bit a year, despite those huge interest rates or whatever it may be. So to me, this is it's an absolute no-brainer. And for that reason, I've described degree apprenticeships as my two favourite words in the English language. Now, someone like David will say, well, not enough disadvantaged people are doing them. Well, I agree. But I also think that if you create a cascade of I get on very well with David Willett, just so you all know, and he's a great man. But we have this discussion quite a bit. But if you, at the moment, there are problems with disadvantaged people going to university. Yes, more disadvantaged people going to university. They're dropping out more. They don't go to some of the so-called better universities. So what you do is you have an £800 million access fund at the moment that is supposed to be used for inclusion to get disadvantaged pupils. It's not working. All that funding should be spent, on my view, on getting giving chances to disadvantaged students from all over the country to do degree apprenticeships. And the problems that we face begin with snobbery, as careers advice, which is pretty crummy when it comes to apprenticeships and schools. And there are issues with the levy and the funding, and I'll come on to those sort of technical issues in a minute. But our Tory party, we talked about Oxbridge during the leadership campaign. I mean, I found that thoroughly depressing. They're wonderful universities, whippity-do. But actually, I know, and I've met thousands of students who've done degree apprenticeships over the years that I've been going on about this, who go to great universities to do their degree, go to great blue chip companies, and are doing really well. And it makes a huge difference to their life. And the problem that we as a party face, and actually it's not just as a party, but the so-called dinner party circuit. If you're at a dinner, and someone says, what do you do, or whatever, and someone says, I go to Oxbridge, people are going to go, wow, that's interesting, or whatever. But if you're at the dinner, you say, no, I'm in an apprenticeship with Jaguar, no one's going to, you won't get that reaction because of the inbuilt snobbery, because every politician, including myself, has gone to university, and we can't even get teaching degree apprenticeships through the Department for Education, because they want people to do a degree. I don't understand that. If we have nursing degree apprenticeships and policing degree apprenticeships, why can't we have teaching degree apprenticeships? And so when we'll really have changed that snobbery is when you go to that dinner party, someone says, I've been to Cambridge or whatever, and no one bats an eyelid, and someone says, I'm doing an apprenticeship, and everyone goes, wow, that's incredible, how did you do it, how's your job? And then we'll really know that we have changed things. The other thing that the government needs to do to really change things is transform our careers. I mean, when I come back to Earth, I'm going to come back as a government career quango, because you get pots of money and very little outcome. There is so much replication and duplication. If you go to a school, there's 100 different organisations offering to go into the school. And when you ask them, they come before my committee, and I ask them, what are the outcomes? Oh, we don't know the outcomes, but we've got a lot of inputs. We've appointed 5,000 million advisors, or had a conference for 150 grand in the Stratfield Kids Zone or whatever it is, which they did by the way, one of these quangos. And I don't know what the outcomes are. And there's so much replication. I go around the country and I meet apprentices. I ask every single one of them, did your school tell you about apprenticeships? The answer is no, 9 times out of 10, no. I've been around the country, I've met apprentices who are doing degree apprentices. They've offered to go back to their own school to teach the kids about apprentices. They've offered it to the schools have said no. Why? Because it's graduate, university. The whole system is geared to university. You have pictures on the wall at schools about kids going to university, nothing about going to do apprentices. It's changing, absolutely. The fact that the Taxpayers Alliance is having an important fringe meeting like that shows the change in the Conservative Party. But until we change careers advice, I'd have every student doing work experience. From primary school onwards, even if they just visit companies for a day. And we need to change our curriculum as well. And there is a big argument about GCSE and A-levels. Let me just park the GCSE one before I start World War III. But on terms of post-16 education, why on earth do we allow students to narrow to do 3 subjects at the age of 16 when what they should be doing is what's a baccalaureate, like 150 other countries do, and it's not a diminution of standards, because I've seen it in Tunbridge Grammar School in Kent. I've seen the careers baccalaureate at King Ethelbert School in Kent, and they have incredible outcomes. But they teach vocational education alongside, and that's where you change the system and you change careers and you encourage people to do vocational education. And I'd also have a UTC, University Technical School. One of my heroes in life is Ken Baker. He's one of the greatest politicians who I really admire, who has fought for vocational education for many years. He says, have a UTC stream in every school. So every school will have a technical thing, instead of this artificial divide where we say, and you talked about this, parity of esteem, you have one side doing technical education and another group of students doing academic education. It shouldn't be an either or, it should be blended, in my view. And why is this important? Because we know that we've got 9 million adults in England with low literacy or numeracy skills who've got a skill gap costing billions and billions of pounds a year. You know, we're about to enter, this is the kind of crazy world that we're in. We have a baccalaureate that doesn't have design and technology in it. Now, the world of automation, 28% of jobs done by young people could be lost to automation by 2030, according to statistics. What happens? What do we do to design and technology as a party? Margaret Thatcher, by the way, introduced design and technology. What do? We allow it to decline. We don't value it. So you've got design and technology take up at GCSE halving between 2011 and 2022. Since 2010 altogether, 65% fall in the number of students doing design and technology. That is criminal. One of the most important subjects, we say, well, they've got I love history, it's my favourite subject, but why on earth, if we have a baccalaureate, why is design and technology, which is so important for the future, because the world we're about to enter, why on earth don't we change that? And just on the reform of the apprenticeship levy, I don't want to weaken it to call it a skills levy. I want us to build an apprenticeship and skills nation. I've been to Austria, I've been to Switzerland, I've been to Germany. They are incredible. It's a completely different culture. I remember speaking to a German business. The German business said to me, I said, why are you training this 14-year-old? He said, the guy said to me, when I was in Germany, what do you mean, why are we training it? It's our duty. We want to, this is what we do. We train apprenticeships from 14-year-old. Switzerland, Austria, all these countries do it much better than us. And why can't we be like that? I just do not understand. So let's not weaken the levy because it changes the culture. It means that big business employ apprentices, but let's tune the levy. So if businesses are what Rob Wilson said, milking the system, make sure that if you are doing the skills that the country needs, then you use more of your levy. If you're doing degree apprenticeships that are meeting the skills needs of the country, you use more of your levy. If you hire a young person, 16, use more of your levy. And if you hire someone from a disadvantaged background, you use more of your levy. But whatever we do, we must not dilute the apprenticeship levy. And just finally, let's have a bit of imagination. Everyone goes on about overseas aid money, right? There's a scheme called Voluntary Services Overseas. Now, they send people for a few months. Why on earth don't we have a voluntary apprenticeship services overseas where we use our aid money to fund literally hundreds of thousands of young people to go abroad to help to develop their own skills and help developing countries? Do you think if I knocked on a door in my constituency of Harlow, there'd be one person who would complain that's how we're spending our overseas aid? No. Let's have it, and that idea may not be the right one, but let's have a bit of imagination. And by the way, just one or two other quick things. Anyone who wins a government contract in procurement, unless they have 5% of their staff, they shouldn't be able to get government contracts, in my view. They should have 5% apprenticeships. Why, if the government's aim and objective is to have more apprenticeships, why should they win a contract by the government and let the government fully fund apprenticeships for people aged 16 to 18 to put vocational education on the same footing as a university and so on. So that's where I am. I'm passionate. I want to build an apprenticeship and skills nation. I believe in levelling up, although my constituents mainly think it's about the potholes. But I believe in it, and I think it's incredibly important. But if we carry on going on about a subset of educational issues that a tiny minority of people care about, and not actually get up, transform, the Prime Minister, I would be over the moon if she mentioned apprenticeships in her speech on Wednesday. I would be over the moon. And the government go on about economic growth all the time. Well, fine, but if they're going on about pies a lot, I happen to like pies, but what I want is a skills, if they're going on about economic capital, we've got to have skills capital as well, because you don't get economic capital without skills capital. I don't believe in the trickle-down theory. I believe you have to have skills and social capital hand in hand with economic capital. That's all I wanted to say, but thank you.
That was all you wanted to say. That was a tour de force. Thanks, Rob. Listen, we are pushed for time. We've got our sessions at this year's ThinkTent, so we're going to go straight to questions. We'll take them in bunches of three since so many hands have gone up. Yeah, Sarah, you go for it.
Hi, Stephen from Epsom. It's really frustrating when you meet a lot of people who really want to get on, who are, perhaps stuck in low-paid jobs, and with a bit more, and they really want to get on. With a bit more training and a bit more experience, if that could be offered, they could get to the next level, and they could be earning more and improving productivity, and it would just be a complete virtuous circle. And quite often, it just needs that little bit of little push, that bit of training, that bit of maybe mentorship that would help. And how can you incentivize companies to do this actively to help people get along
Thank you.
better?
Could you pass the microphone one along?
Thank you. Chris Calvert, I'm from Pudsey Conservatives in West Yorkshire. I'm a proud blue-collar Conservative. Do you think that there's a little bit too much of a snobbery in the employment sector in relation to people who have skills, in a way? They're more focused on graduate jobs. When I've been out of work myself, it's quite depressing when you don't have a degree and all you see is that all they want is graduates.
And this gentleman here. Oh, sorry, is it passed along already?
Yeah.
Right,
Hi.
good.
Hi, I'm Angelo Basu from Leeds Northwest. It's rare I've been to a fringe where I've agreed with almost everybody about almost everything. I'm a governor of a PFI school, and I can say that we are very good at pushing apprenticeships as a really good thing for our students. But also we see how the lack of skills and the lack of opportunities, I think as Jasmine was mentioning, can impact even at lower levels. So in the last year, one of our big issues has been, in terms of delivering education, was that the school wasn't cleaned properly. And Mighty is actually our FM contractor, and they were having difficulties recruiting and retaining people that you would, in this room, maybe hopefully we wouldn't say it, but people generally would say, oh, those are unskilled or low-skilled jobs. But actually, if you want to recruit and retain cleaners, you need to give them good career paths. You need to give them the abilities. So I love all the higher education stuff. I love the degree level stuff. But I think I want to reiterate, and I want Jasmine to be encouraged that actually I'm on side about what we do with lower skill levels, because that then feeds back to improving the school and improving the outcomes of the children in the school.
Thank you, Angelo. Jasmine, could you pick up on Angelo's point on?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's good to see that as a panel we violently agree that the apprenticeship levy and apprenticeships are part of the future. I think from an entry-level perspective, that's where we have the gap. So we've got people in cleaning and security roles, to your point, that don't have an apprenticeship standard, so cannot progress. And we want them to be the leaders of the future in Mighty, and we can't get them past that level. So when you do an apprenticeship, it has to be based on the job that you do today. So if we can't get them through the skills development that they need to progress, build more skills, earn more money, that's a real barrier for us. So I think when we look at progressing people, we need to break down the barriers to access. So we need to give people, basic maths and English so that they can get onto apprenticeship. That's the real disadvantaged group we're looking to help. And then we need courses for the lower skilled roles such that they can progress through into higher skilled roles and earn more money. So that's absolutely what we're looking to change.
Lord Willits, how can we incentivise companies to embrace this agenda?
Well, I think we certainly need more vocational training. I think we have to liberate ourselves from the idea the only way of doing that is by something called an apprenticeship, because I have such wonderful exchanges with Rob on all this, Robert Halfon, and he's fighting a battle for an apprenticeship to have a distinct and specific meaning, and I respect him for that. And I think one of the consequences of that is you need other forms of training. And if I may just add a couple of other comments, because this tent is partly about believers in free markets and flexibility. It is just worth recording that if you look at the German model, which is undoubtedly a high apprenticeship model, you see large numbers of many more professions protected and activities protected around licenses to practice. You see compulsory membership of chambers of commerce. You see a model of economic management which is very different than the free market economic model of Britain, US, Australia, all three countries incidentally which already have more than 50% of people going into higher education. So the pitch for the German model is a pitch for a different type of structure of the labour market. And if you say things like, we should guarantee you an apprenticeship, and if you also think an apprenticeship means an employer having decided to employ you, we're saying guarantee you a job with an employer. And this is the residual Thatcherite in me. This is why, this is the issue, and this is the right tent for discussing this, exactly how interventionist are we going to be in regulating the labour market and requiring things of employers?
Rob?
Yeah, I just want to come back to something Stephen said, because I think the point you were making is that incremental steps are the key to social mobility. Because the way we look at social mobility at the moment is we look at it, the dustman becomes, some high-flying executive in a big organisation and makes that huge step, and we're all cheering and clapping. But actually, social mobility is about people in their everyday lives moving on bit by bit. And I think that's really what you were referring to. And I think we should keep that in mind when we are thinking about some of these issues. I just want to also mention, somebody talked about teachers and schools earlier on. And I just want to say that there are very few teachers that don't recognise the importance of apprenticeships. But how many of those teachers actually have the experience and knowledge to recommend apprenticeships to and how many would? And I can tell you it's only 26% feel in the ability to recommend an apprenticeship, whereas 70% recognise how important apprenticeships can be to those people's future lives. So there are some big issues here that we need to take head on, and making sure schools properly understand apprenticeships is one of them.
Okay, we're really pushed for time. Let's try this side of the room. There's a lady at the back in the blue. If you've got a question for somebody specifically, could you identify that as well?
It's more of a comment. My name is Jane Hickey. I'm from the Association of Employment and Learning Providers, and we represent just under 800 independent training providers who deliver 7 in 10 apprenticeships in England. And it's just to say, as a starting point, absolutely apprenticeships are the key to social mobility, and where we need to really start is with information, advice and guidance. It's simply not good enough, and young people are just not being given the information that allows for them to make choices, and many of them, I believe, would make the choice to take up an apprenticeship as opposed to go to university. But I think also the point was just made, which is about teachers and the information they have about apprenticeships that they can give to young people. I think that also needs to be addressed. But the starting point, I think, is information, advice and guidance.
All right, there was a chap just there in glasses, Duncan. Yep.
So Ben Richards from Kingfisher. A very simple question. Why would a sole trader or an SME take on an apprentice, and how would you improve access, the ability of a sole trader to take on apprentices, specifically thinking about the trades, kind of plumbers and areas where there's quite a large labour shortage at the moment?
Okay, and final one for this round, this lady down here.
Thank you. My name is Donia. I'm from Multiverse. We're an apprenticeship training provider. I wanted to ask the panel about the calls for flexibility What can we do to ensure that modular and flexible training is regulated and is high quality and not just used for things like induction or health and safety training, which would economy and growth?
Let's take that last question first. Jasmine.
Look, I think we'd like flexibility in the levy to fund shorter courses, and that's for a couple of reasons. So one is part-timers. 53% of our workforce are locked out of the levy because they work less than 30 hours a week and they can't justify the time off. It's too expensive for employers to fund 20% off the job. But also because we want to give people core skills that they need to then progress onto apprenticeships. So I think it covers your point nicely. If we can flex the levy to spend it on courses beyond apprenticeships, we unlock apprenticeships further down the line for a much broader group of people.
Chris.
So taking on the point about small businesses, SMEs, sole traders, effectively an MP's office is a small business. I have an apprentice in my office. He's absolutely fantastic, and I will say it was a game changer for us. It brought a very different perspective to the way we were working. So I would definitely say that if you are going to onboard somebody as a small trader or as a small business, you will actually find that it's a virtuous cycle. It helps you actually sort of think about the way you're doing the job as well. You sort of start to impart information differently. You start thinking about processes differently. What will it bring to your business? Well, I think it certainly will increase your capacity. It will also give you, I think, the ability to consider what you want to do in the future. I think they're fantastic things, apprenticeships. I have definitely experienced firsthand, sort of the positive benefits in a small working environment. So I would heartily encourage anybody who's a sole trader or an SME to bring somebody on board. But as the lady at the back said, it is about getting information out there. I actually didn't know how to go about the process. I just knew instinctively it was something I wanted to look into, and luckily I have a very good FE college in my patch that was able to advise me. But I do think that part is going to be really, really important. It's making sure that teachers feel confident to advise students that this is an option and that it's not a substandard option to getting a degree. It's an alternative.
Rob.
So, just on the lady at the back, well, I said it in my remarks about information and guidance. I'd have a genuinely proper UCAS for FE, a university, FE skills and apprenticeship. There's a sort of half-hearted one going on at the moment.
Take another round.
And I would, my belief is the Department for Education is about education and skills. The Department for Work and Pension is about work. So move the careers stuff, CV and all this sort of thing to the Department of Work and Pensions, and set up a skills body that gets more kids to do skills. You'd have teachers doing degree apprenticeships. That would encourage them to encourage apprenticeships. So it would be a virtuous circle. On the point about small businesses, well, if you look at, this is where I have massive praise for the former Chancellor, because the Kickstart scheme is £3,000 incentive pounds for business, including small businesses. That was a 43% increase in the starts in the last quarter of 2021. And that worked. And so what you have to do to make sure that small businesses encourage apprenticeships is basically help them financially, find some kind of financial credit. We have an R&D credit for research and development. Why on earth don't we have a skills credit for companies investing in genuine skills that our country needs and that help the disadvantage? And also, we've got to get rid of the ridiculous bureaucracy, because if you're a big company, you can just about handle the bureaucracy from the IFA, from the Department for Education inspection regimes, you name it, Ofsted, whatever, but you need to cut away the bureaucracy for small companies, because they would then be incentivized to have more apprenticeships. But they've got to be proper apprenticeships, and they can't just be like they were in the past. You hire someone for a few weeks and you call him or her an apprentice.
All right, we're going to do some at the front now. 1, 2, and 3 at the front.
David Barker from Apprentices. Rob Wilson, a great point about apprenticeships, a great lever for social mobility. He did it for me, and I'm sure many other people in the room. The challenge is about 3 years ago, there's about a third of apprentices not completing apprenticeships, and now it's nearly a half. The research shows that lack of is one of the key reasons why apprentices are dropping out. So what more support can government be doing partly to drive that?
Great question, thank you. And these two gentlemen here.
Speakers for schools. So, Rob, you did talk about young people not learning about apprenticeships at school, but young people who actually go on to work placement with an employer between the age of 14 to 18, they actually learn more about career pathways. So do you think there should be a reform to support more work experience placements for schools?
I'll just answer that very quickly. Absolutely, that's what I was saying in my speech. I want every kid to do work experience. I'd like, even if university degrees aren't apprenticeship degrees, I'd like every university student to have part of their time, not taking a year going out somewhere, but part of their week doing work experience. So if you're doing English literature, you might work at a library, a publisher's, a museum, or whatever it may be. If you're doing science, you do actually quite a lot, but every single student should do as part of their week some kind of work experience. And if you start it in the schools, you then change the nature of work, and you get a higher employment. And all the statistics show the more work experience that students have, the more likely they're going to get good employment later on.
We'll try this one.
Sorry, thank you. Robert said, why should youngsters vote Conservative? They should vote Conservative because Jasmine said this is her first conference. The first conference that I attended, if you mentioned email, everyone would have been shaking. Now, if we can all take apprenticeship and learn and adapt to change, and now email is so much important part of our life, we can all identify for the heartland of industrial revolution, the Midlands and the Birmingham, and find high-tech industries so that the younger generation can find apprenticeship in the high-tech industries and secure jobs, get a mortgage, and more importantly, Conservative is the party of business, and we are the ones who are going to provide that for them. And this is the reason why they should vote Conservative. If we can all adapt to change and become high-tech literate like we had to from my first conference, I think the world and the future is bright and brighter for the younger generation. Thank you.
Abdul. Rob Wilson, could you pick up David's point?
You, David. Yeah, okay. You're absolutely right, firstly, that the dropout rates for apprenticeships are actually huge. Some estimates have them over 40%, which is very, very significant. But the reasons for that are actually quite wide-ranging and complex. For example, dropout factors include things like they didn't have enough time for training, poor quality training, badly run programs, and lack of support from the training provider was another one. So there are lots of reasons for it happening. And it goes back, I suppose, to a point that Robert made about, I think the point you made about dropouts. Did you make a point about dropouts, or was that me? I can't remember. Anyway, it was about starts and outcomes, that's right. So in my view, you have to look at not how many people start apprenticeship programs, it's how many people finish them and what they come out with. And if you've got a dropout rate of nearly 50% in some cases, that is an absolutely appalling waste of human capital. So we've got to find ways of making sure that that doesn't happen. And there are a series of things you can do, and we could talk about those, if we have more time later. But the dropout rate is a significant problem that we need to overcome.
Lord Willits, any thoughts on Abdul's point on high-tech industries driving this?
Yeah, I thought that was I loved your intervention, and of course we've got to be optimistic about the future. And I agree with Rob Halfon's challenge about younger people voting Conservative. But that's why I do think there's a danger in some of this. The majority of young people now go to university, and it keeps on going up. And not because of any target, it's because of personal choice. And it's not just because of some strange experiment in England, it's true across most advanced Western countries. I see no evidence of this social trend changing. Higher education means a host of different things. At the University of Birmingham, a mile that way, it means neutron research to work out the performance of advanced materials and how long the inner part of a nuclear reactor will work for. Half a mile that way at the University of Aston, a former college of advanced technology, it is business focused and sandwich courses for a year as the middle of your degree, just as Rob wishes to see. This wide range of provision of higher education is what most young people want to do. And if you look at the seats where which Tories represent and which have the biggest Tory majorities, they don't have 50% participation in higher education. They have 60%. They have 70%. We Tories represent the high participation areas. If we think this is a problem, it's a social problem, very strangely concentrated in the most prosperous suburbs of London, Birmingham, and Manchester, and in Tory areas where the economy is strongest. So it's a very unusual social problem for us to be worrying about, but that's where we find it. It's in Tory seats. I want to see young people having great opportunities for apprenticeships. I think an important message from our discussion today is there are other forms of training apart from apprenticeships, and even if you want to see more apprenticeships, you have to recognize that there's not just apprenticeship as the only form of delivering it. I want to see many young people who go to higher education doing the best courses for them, and when they look back, very few young people regret going to university, but what they do regret often is the subject that they did, which is again where I make common cause with Rob Halfon. We have early specialisation is a far bigger problem in the English education system than the fact that, like most other countries, we've got more and more people going into higher education.
Rob Halfon.
So, if David doesn't mind me coming back to him, I mean, one of the reasons why so many people go to universities is because no one knows about apprenticeship offerings, which was the whole argument I was trying to make in my speech. But I was with a group of students this morning, and not one of them had even heard the word about apprenticeships or degree apprenticeships, or had been told by their school. So of course, because the whole system is pushing them to university. And in the towns that we need to win, not just the rich suburbs that David is talking about, in the towns up and down the country like mine, people value vocational education and skills, and why do we have, you know, we have white working class boys and girls on free school meals underperform at every stage of the education system compared to most other ethnic groups. And yet, those communities value vocational education. Yet we don't
and
do
Rob,
enough.
my former constituency of Havant was a working class constituency with 25% participation. And I reckon the only way for more of those young people to fulfill their aspiration and go to higher education was to increase the size of higher education. If I had to wait for participation in the in the prosperous Tory suburbs to fall to make spaces for my constituents, I was going to have a very long wait. We equally shouldn't be saying higher education is if you're in Surrey, but it's not if you're in Havant and not if you're in the northeast. It should be an aspiration, and we should have more FE colleges on the journey to providing higher education as well. This is part of being an aspirational party. Trying to stop it happening is very high risk, economically and politically.
Let's end with a compromise, degree apprenticeships, because then you have your university and then I have my apprenticeship.
Yes.
How about that?
And they count towards Blair's 50% target, which is 50% in HE.
You want 75%.
We didn't actually put them on the extreme left and extreme right on purpose.
I always enjoy these debates with both Robs.
And fascinating it has been, but unfortunately we are out of time. I do lots of these sessions, and quite often we end up identifying a bunch of problems and come up with no solutions. But that, to me, felt like a real attempt to come up with some solutions to fix some of the problems that we have. So thank you very much to our panellists for such an engaging, lively debate. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you too to our sponsor, Mighty, this afternoon.